Tales from the Storm is a series of official short stories released during the Stormblood Expansion. And this is the 7th story, The First Step. The mood in the Flames' carriage was worthy of a wait. While pretending to gaze out at the parched landscape of southern Thanalan, the youth tried in vain to think of something to say. Across from him sat the Grand Company's recently former summoned squad. The doughty souls charged with combating primal threat, none of whom had said a word since their departure. Silently he rehearsed an opening line. "Say you lot brave or stupid?" Although he and his had been dispatched to render aid in this mission, they had yet to establish a rapport with the soldier, and he was determined to break the ice. "My name is Arenvald Lentius," he eventually managed, and when no response was forthcoming, he added, "So, you lot fight primals often?" At this, the Lalafalin summoner sitting opposed shrugged wordlessly. "Why do I bother?" But then the woman next to him took pity and replied, "As often as circumstances warrant, I suppose. Crispin and I have battled Ifrit 4 times now," he said, gesturing at the 3rd summoner, who gamely accepted the conversation baton. "Though our experience pales in comparison to the lieutenant's, Yaya Samu is formerly one of the company of heroes. He faced the Lord of Cracks and lived." "Ah, so he's the dab hand." The lieutenant glanced at him briefly before looking away again, indifferent, probably wondering why you're riding with a pair of young nobodies. "Veterans then, that's a relief. I try not to get underfoot." As soon as the words had left his mouth, he regretted playing the part. "Useless bloody well. If you value your life, you do 2 things, watch and learn," Yaya Samu snapped before resuming his pre-battle ritual of ignoring one and all. "So that's the way it's going to be, eh?" Arenvald stifled a sigh and forced a smile as he glanced sidelong at his fellow whelp, praying to the 12 that she would not make matters worse. But if the lieutenant words had struck a nerve, she didn't show it. Her eyes were closed, her face devoid of all tension, the very picture of serenity, the calm before the storm. Maybe the 2 of them had the right of it. Accepting defeat, Arenvald abandoned his brilliant plan to befriend the squad before battle and instead cast his mind back to the circumstances that led him to share a carriage with the summoners and Fordola Lupis. Fate and the science had conspired to bring him back to Alamigo, his homeland, and it was there that they had first met, as mortal enemies on the battlefield. The same age, the same birth, and yet somehow they had come to lead such different lives. He, the half-breed spawn of a Garlean soldier cast out by his mother, had left Girabania and become an adventurer, while she, a pureblood daughter of Alamigo, had been gifted an imperial education and taken up arms against their own countrymen. Yet for everything we strove to escape, to deny, our paths led us here. As a scion, he had earned the respect of the Resistance and the Alamican people, whereas she, as a traitor and a kinslayer, had earned their scorn. Only death would answer death, they believed. Nor perhaps were they wrong. And then came the day they stood on the same side of a battlefield. The representatives had gathered from all across Girabania to discuss the future of Alamigo, only for proceedings to be plunged into chaos by an act of treachery. Sri Lakshmi, summoned by the Kalana, would have bound all present to her will were it not for the intervention of the Warrior of Light, Arenvald and Fordola. "It's done. Take me back to my cell." With those words, Fordola had thrown down the sword Lee's hex put in her hands when the former scion had challenged the hated butcher to take her own life, as Xenos had, or used her newfound power for a noble purpose. Arenvald watched them lead her away, was as they once more debated the fate of his kinswoman and her fellow collaborators. In the end, it was Rauban who had proffered the solution: conscription. A new unit in which some convicts might serve out their sentence instead of in a cell or at the end of a rope. Though others were extended the offer, it was plain who they wanted most. Fordola had proven herself capable of withstanding primal influence. Her abilities as a resonant, coupled with a combat expertise, made her an invaluable asset in the never-ending war against primals. A weapon. She agreed. Out of the courage! Let's go! Let's go! The words of the Rogadin captain riding with the coachman dragged Arenvald back to the present. With practiced precision, the summoner grabbed their gear and disembarked, forming a line before their superior. Arenvald followed suit. As you know, yesterday Master Coltinet of the Science informed us of an etheric disturbance in the vicinity of Sanrak Altar. So disturbance can almost certainly be attributed to a primal summoning. The captain walked up and down the line, searching his soldiers' faces. Luckily for us, we've got ourselves a couple of secret weapons. Arenvald felt their eyes upon him and Fordola. Arenvald of the Science and Fordola of the Resistance, echo blessed, the both of them. So no need to worry about them getting tempered. That said, I'm obliged to divulge certain details regarding the latter. He saw their faces darken as they listened, their eyes narrow, their bodies tense. Fordola cocked her head and chuckled. If I was gonna stab you, it would be from the front, not the back. But don't worry, you little head, my neck is still in the hangman's noose. She tapped the gem inlaid choker below her chin with 2 fingers. You can trust in words, or you can trust in magic. If the resistant thaumaturge tasked with keeping an eye on Fordola was so inclined, he could trigger the enhancement woven in the neckpiece, causing it to gradually grow warmer and tighter, slowly searing her skin as it choked the life out of from her. Rather you than me, a proper hanging snaps to your neck at least. The captain cleared his throat and continued. Given their talents, we'll have them hold Ifrit at bay, while the summoner squad engage at range with Eggy and magic. You'll have healers as support, as well as the girls' minders. I'll be directing the diversion maneuvers to the south. Any questions? Right then. They left the Forgotten Springs and ventured a few malms east into the Zagoli. Before Captain Wolf and his contingent peeled off to lay siege to a nearby Amalja encampment, providing the summoner squad with a distraction they needed to head north toward the Sanrak Altar undetected. Arenvald led the way through a narrow canyon, clinging to the shadow some 50 yalms ahead of the party. Spying an oblivious sentry, he gestured for his comrades to stop and slowly drew his dagger. Wiping the blade clean, he looked back and signaled the others to join him. As one, they continued north towards the altar, where they found, as they had feared, a ring of flame, and the Lord of the Inferno waiting at his heart. Even in the aftermath, he struggled to remember the fight. The primal had been summoned with a token quantity of crystals, and Arenvald had not felt a fraction as hard-pressed as he had during the battle with Sri Lakshmi. The summoners and healers had all performed admirably, a victory won on the training ground, not the battlefield. We're finished here, all units withdraw. At Captain Wolf's command, they set out to return the way they had come. Advance no further. Arenvald was already diving the moment he heard the scream. Peering out from cover, he saw a figure in the dirt, clutching an arrow in his gut, his black iron points protruding obscenely from his back. Amalja. Stay put and stay quiet. Leave the fighting to me and Ollie. Enemy archers, Westridge, get behind those rocks. Arenvald closed his eyes, took a breath, and counted to 4. Shafts were raining down all around them now. Raising a shield, he broke and ran towards the summoners to help defend the retreat, and passed Fordola sprinting in the opposite direction, sword flashing as he danced through a hail of arrows. I knew it! I knew she would run, Yasamu bellowed with a hint of triumph. Alarm bells ring in his head. Arenvald looked back and saw he was headed for the wounded soldier, a resistance man, the thaumaturge. But just as Arenvald felt his stomach drop in his boots, and the grip of his sword dig deeper into his palm, he saw Fordola pull the mace to his feet and offer him her shoulder. And then Arenvald was running again, this time into the open, his silver armor flashing in the sunlight as he shouted curses and threw stones at the archer on the ridge, daring them to face him. After a time, the arrows subsided and the archers vanished from sight. Better to leave the madman be, eh? For a moment, he let himself relax. Keep your guard up, boy. Arenvald caught the first arrow on his shield and drew his sword in time to cut down the second and third. Sorry, Abba. The archer, a hulking brute of an Amalj'aa wearing a mask, took careful aim. Look at it! With cry he raised his shield and charged, closing the gap and driving his full weight into this ill-prepared foe. As the archer staggered backwards, Arenvald raised his sword and brought it down, leaving his enemy's bow in two, as he raised it in vain attempt to ward off the blow. The Amalj'aa crumbled to the earth, and the surrounding sand grew dark and wet. The silence was deafening, and Arenvald knew the champion's comrades had been watching. Bloody hell, that was the stupidest display of heroism I've seen in years, and I wonder why I hate the young ones. Muttering under his breath, the summoner bade his familiar return to him. As the floating mass of rock passed Arenvald, he saw the masked Amalj'aa's final arrow was lodged squarely in his breast. The mood in the flames' carriage was worthy of a name-day feast. The summoners all smiled as they chatted amongst themselves and even laughed at some of Arenvald's jokes. Fordola sat apart from it all, elbows on knees, head bowed, though the Scion thought he spied Yajasamu giving her an appraising look before they had set out. Arenvald had been with her when the Tomators wandered over. She had been kneeling in the sand, packing up her gear, when he asked why she had risked her life to save his. Little girls need their fathers, was all she said before tightening a final strap and boarding the carriage. The man turned to him then, his face a picture of perplexity. I never said anything about having a daughter. To which Arenvald could only shrug and smile. A lucky guess. It all begins with the first step.